you believe your stagnation stems from laziness, a lack of discipline, or even incompetence, the truth may be far more frightening. Perhaps you're afraid of the light within you. You feel exhausted, as if every attempt to rise is caught in a thick fog. Looking back on the years that have passed, you see yourself still standing in the same place, even though your mind has always longed for something greater. Somewhere inside you ask, am I not good enough? But if Carl Jung were sitting in front of you right now, he would gently shake his head and smile. For him, the tragedy doesn't lie in a flaw. Jung once said, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. What we truly avoid, what leads to so many things going wrong, is the immense power sleeping within us. This is also the very light that could make us different and perhaps lonely. Out of fear of that greatness, we choose a smaller, safer life. And today's journey doesn't bring you remedies to fix yourself, because your soul was never broken. This is a descent into the shadow to reclaim your power, gently removing the mask of perfectionism and stepping into the process of individuation. The destination is wholeness, a place where you get to be yourself, fully and powerfully. Number 1, exposing perfectionism, the mask of procrastination. The moment we begin the journey of reclaiming our power, one of the first gatekeepers to appear is often perfectionism. For many people, it looks like a suit of shining armor, neat, polished, admired. Yet beneath that glossy surface lies an uncomfortable truth. Perfectionism is often the most subtle way of postponing real life. Why is that? Because modern American society glorifies high standards, and professionalism has almost become a belief system. In work, in education, even in intimate relationships, the ideal figure is someone who makes no mistakes, shows no weakness, and is always ready to overcome every challenge without a single scratch on their competency record. Employers write job descriptions as if recruiting superheroes. Social media is flooded with images of success that look flawless, composed, and without blemish. Carl Jung used the term ego to describe the conscious part of the psyche, the I, the manager of daily life, always seeking recognition and safety. Perfectionism is precisely a defensive mechanism of the ego. It makes us believe that if we never do anything wrong, if we never expose a weakness, we won't be criticized, we won't be hurt. Instead of daring to live truthfully, the ego chooses to put on a perfect suit of armor. But the unspoken truth is this: the harder we chase perfection, the further we drift from who we truly are. Trying to keep everything flawless is like exhausting yourself to keep a lake perfectly still. One small gust of wind and everything ripples. At their core, perfectionists are not necessarily lovers of excellence. They are people who fear the pain of being discovered as not good enough. You may recognize this image somewhere around you, or right within yourself. Someone who has spent years polishing a manuscript but has never sent it out. Someone who keeps diligently collecting courses and certifications, yet still doesn't feel confident enough to truly begin their dream project. Everything remains stuck in the phase of preparation. So many springs have passed, and the self feels like a car that never starts, waiting for the road ahead to be absolutely perfect. Without a single pothole, without a single curve. This state is called paralysis by analysis, being immobilized by overthinking. When we become too preoccupied with being right, being enough, being certain, we no longer have the energy for real action. Life, at this point, resembles a stream frozen solid. The energy that wants to surge forth as creativity, as movement, is instead held back at the threshold of fixing, preparing, improving. As a result, rather than moving forward, the perfectionist stands still, or even retreats within their own mind. That perfect mask, in Jung's language, is also called the persona. The persona is like the formal attire we put on when stepping into the public eye. It helps us be accepted, be liked, avoid direct criticism. Yet at the same time, it separates us from our real feelings and authentic longings. When the mask is worn for too long, we gradually forget what our true face looks like. Beneath the mask of the perfectionist, there is often a very real fear. The fear of being seen as vulnerable, of being judged as not good enough, inferior, or incompetent. Or, if we try to picture it, perfectionism is a self-perpetuating loop. It begins with the desire to do well, to be recognized. Then, each time real action approaches, the fear of failure and rejection rises up. To protect itself, the ego invents yet another task of refinement. Like a tree that keeps pruning its own branches until it no longer has the strength to bloom, the perfectionist becomes exhausted within the very dance of flawlessness they have created. This leads to another subtle trait of perfectionism. It turns busyness into a shield. We are constantly planning, studying more, preparing, reviewing every detail. The feeling of being busy gives us a dose of psychological morphine, quieting the inner voice that urges real action. When we look at our packed schedules, it's easy to believe we are moving forward, even though, in reality, everything remains stuck in place. There is another point worth reflecting on. Perfectionism is not only a defense against others, but also a way of avoiding oneself. When all attention is consumed by the question, "Am I good enough yet?" the mind has no space left to ask, "What actually makes me feel alive? What do I truly want?" Many American adults have lived through this state. Talented children who once received praise like "you're exceptional" often grow up feeling as if they are free-falling in the open sea. Small achievements fail to fill the emptiness that arises when they realize they are living someone else's life, a perfect copy according to society's standards, yet one that lacks a sense of inner fulfillment. Jung emphasized that real development requires the courage to step beyond the comfort zone, the cocoon we create for ourselves. With each day spent inside that cocoon, we slowly forget how to stretch outward, even forgetting what we once longed for. So how can you tell when you are stuck inside the cocoon of perfectionism? The signs are not hard to see. You always feel not ready yet, even after preparing for a long time. You don't dare send out the first draft, apply for the new position, or try something that makes your body tremble with fear. You tell yourself, "I'll do it. Just let me revise it one more time." That is the sweetest promise the ego makes to you, a promise that keeps you safely within paralysis. It is time to acknowledge the rationalizations we use to shield procrastination. It is time to ask, if perfection is the shell, what lies beneath? This question brings us to the threshold of true growth, where darkness transforms from an enemy into a guide. Number 2, excavating the shadow, where true talent is hidden. When the perfect mask begins to crack, the next thing we are forced to face is the deepest part within ourselves. It is like a dark cellar, difficult for light to reach. In Carl Jung's psychology, this is the shadow, the place that holds aspects of the self that have been denied, hidden, or never consciously acknowledged. When people hear about the shadow, most immediately think of dark, undesirable traits: anger, envy, selfishness, thoughts that society teaches us to suppress or eliminate. Western culture, and especially American culture, tends to emphasize the bright side of the human being: positivity, altruism, self-control. From a young age, we are taught to behave properly, to restrain ourselves, to always act like a good kid in order to receive praise and approval. But this is only a small part of the picture. Jung was the first to reveal that the shadow is not merely a collection of bad or weak traits. If we look more deeply into his legacy, we encounter a surprising truth. Within the darkness lies far more gold than poison. Jung often borrowed imagery from alchemy to describe psychological transformation, the process of turning the roughest materials into pure gold. The truth of the matter is that the shadow is 90% pure gold. This is a post-Jungian formulation, but its spirit remains faithful to what he emphasized. There is immense value hidden in the shadow if we have the courage to enter it. I once witnessed this clearly in someone I had known since childhood, Emily. As a child, Emily stood out. In class, she wasn't afraid to voice her opinions. She often took the initiative in organizing games, naturally leading her group of friends. Yet, as she went through adolescence, Emily began to withdraw. She later told me that at home, adults constantly reminded her, "Girls should be well behaved, don't rush to speak first." Or, "If you act like that, you'll make others uncomfortable. Don't cause trouble." Whenever she showed strength or assertiveness. At first, she didn't believe it and refused to listen. But those messages were repeated year after year until she began to doubt herself. By adulthood, everyone described Emily as gentle, cautious, someone who never caused conflict. Yet whenever she had a chance to express her views or faced an important decision, she felt torn. One part of her longing to step forward, another part terrified of being judged. On the outside, Emily appeared to be a stable adult. On the inside, a current of leadership energy, never permitted to live freely, kept surging up, only to be pressed back down again. Emily's story is not rare. Many people grow up in environments where being different or outstanding is encouraged in childhood, only to later become something that must be corrected in order to fit in, not offend anyone, not be labeled as troublesome or arrogant. Gradually, we learn to shrink our natural impulses, hiding decisiveness for fear of being seen as too aggressive, suppressing creativity for fear of being judged as strange, restraining personal ambition for fear of being perceived as self-serving. It is as if there is a diligent prison guard living inside you, locking away everything most radiant simply to keep the prison quiet. Jung described the shadow as an inseparable companion. No matter how much we deny or avoid it, the shadow continues to exist quietly, preserving the energy we once possessed. The essence of the shadow is not evil, but rather unrecognized, not yet illuminated, not yet reconciled, not yet used consciously, because the shadow does not only contain darkness in the literal sense, but also safeguards precious raw gems. The true journey of maturity is a descent into the basement, brushing away layers of dust, discovering and reclaiming what was once abandoned. This is not a comfortable process. It requires honesty, courage, and a certain gentleness toward oneself. This gentleness is entirely different from indulgence. It is the capacity to see and hold even those parts of ourselves that once brought shame, pain, or anger. The larger question then arises, how do we distinguish which parts of the shadow are holding gold and which parts are obstructing our lives? In reality, this boundary is often unclear. Many qualities that once supported our growth are later misunderstood or negatively judged by society. A child who constantly questions and challenges adults may very well grow into a creative thinker if encouraged. But if that child is repeatedly labeled as talkative or disrespectful, the creative energy can turn into frustration, inner conflict, even self-doubt, rooted in the belief that something is wrong with them. The only way forward is to return, to look directly, to ask questions, and enter into dialogue with one's own darkness. This means presence, observation, and honesty with oneself. Which parts of me have been neglected? Which dreams, capacities, or emotions were once suppressed out of fear of being judged by others? Sometimes, simply acknowledging its existence is enough to initiate the journey back to the wholeness of who we are. So what powers are you restraining in your own shadow? Begin by noticing how you react to other people. Number 3, using others as a mirror, the mechanism of projection. Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. Carl Jung left behind this sentence like a golden key, unlocking a hidden door that leads from the chaotic outer world into the deepest layers of the inner psyche. In everyday life, we often assume that our emotional reactions toward others are natural and objective. We believe the other person truly is unlikable, careless, or lazy. Yet, through the lens of analytical psychology, these reactions usually reveal far more about our own unconscious than about the other person's true nature. This is the principle of projection, one of the most subtle and widespread psychological defense mechanisms humans use to avoid facing themselves. Projection operates quietly, like an underground current beneath the surface of consciousness. Its mechanism is simple, yet it creates complex illusions. When our ego lacks the courage or the energy to acknowledge a certain quality within itself, the unconscious throws that rejected part outward into the world and attaches it to someone else. Projection is like wearing a pair of tinted glasses without realizing you have them on. If the lenses are red, the entire world appears soaked in blood and anger. If they are gray, everything seems heavy with sorrow. You may feel shocked or indignant, wondering why the world has changed so drastically, forgetting that the change is not in the scenery, but in the lens through which you are looking. In modern work environments, where individual egos constantly collide with collective norms, negative projection operates more strongly than ever. Try recalling moments when you felt irrationally irritated by someone. Perhaps it is a colleague who speaks loudly, loves to show off, and dominates every meeting. Their presence annoys you so deeply that merely hearing their footsteps makes you tense. You label them arrogant, attention-seeking, yet you may resent their self-display because deep within you, there is also a part that longs to be seen, to be acknowledged, to stand under the spotlight. Instead of tormenting yourself for having negative feelings or trying to cut others down to feel better about yourself, try shifting your perspective. See that envy and irritation as an alarm bell. It is not an enemy. It is a messenger. It is whispering to you. Here lies a source of power that has been neglected. Why are you letting someone else live out a part of your life for you? But this mirror of projection has two sides. If its front reflects the demons we want to deny, then its back reflects the gods we do not dare to acknowledge. Projection does not only occur with hatred, it also appears when we idolize someone. We look up to tech billionaires like Elon Musk, extraordinary artists like Taylor Swift, or inspirational speakers with absolute confidence. We look at them and exclaim in awe, "They are so great. They are geniuses. I am so small and ordinary compared to them." On the surface, this looks like admiration. In truth, it is a deeply tragic form of self-denial. You cannot recognize a quality in another person unless the seed of that same quality exists within you. You cannot be moved by a piece of music if your soul lacks the capacity to feel music. You cannot admire courage if there is not somewhere inside you the blood of a warrior waiting to be awakened. Fierce admiration, therefore, is not merely praise directed at others. It is an urgent signal from the unconscious. Within you, there is also this potential, this same light. You simply have not dared to believe in it, to nurture it, or to allow it to step into the light. So how do we stop throwing parts of ourselves, both trash and treasure, outward into the world? How do we stop living a life of borrowed emotions and begin fully owning our power? Jung called this process the withdrawal of projection. It is an art of living, a journey that demands profound courage and radical honesty with oneself. This process can begin with a small yet revolutionary shift in the language of inner dialogue. When you feel triggered by someone, instead of aiming the arrow of judgment outward, bend that arrow back toward yourself. Instead of saying, "She's so selfish, I can't stand that person," pause, take a deep breath, and ask, "Which selfish part of me is rising up and screaming when I see her? How long have I neglected my own needs?" When you realize that you too have the right to prioritize yourself, that you too have needs that deserve protection, your irritation toward the other person suddenly dissolves. You are no longer emotionally controlled by them. Practice this especially on social media, often described as humanity's giant hall of mirrors. Every like, every surge of envy while scrolling through the news feed is a golden opportunity for inner work. When you see someone else's success and envy rises, don't swallow it and turn it into self-contempt. Don't spit it out to diminish them either. Transform it. See envy as a vaccine. A vaccine is, by nature, a weakened dose of a virus introduced into the body, so the immune system can learn to fight and grow stronger. Similarly, other people's success is the virus. If you know how to withdraw projection, you turn it into motivation. However, the journey does not end with awareness. Even after you have withdrawn projection, even after you have realized, so I too have that kind of greatness within me, another massive obstacle will appear. Why, even knowing our potential, do we still hesitate to step into the light? Why does being ordinary feel safer than becoming extraordinary? This is the deepest and most frightening paradox Jung warned about, the force that has kept millions of people from touching their destiny, the fear of power. And this is the next door, the heaviest door of all, one we must push open with all our strength. Number 4, facing the paradox, the fear of power. After the journey of dismantling the illusion of perfectionism, confronting one's own shadow, and withdrawing projection, it would seem natural to expect a feeling of joy and exhilaration. We imagine that once the treasure is recognized, we will rush forward to claim it. Yet, psychological reality reveals something entirely different, a paradox that causes many to freeze right at the threshold of transformation. Instead of excitement, we feel numb. Instead of moving forward, we want to retreat back into the darkness. Carl Jung, and later the psychologist Abraham Maslow, named this phenomenon the Jonah complex, the fear of one's own greatness. We often say that we fear failure, but if we look deeply into the eyes of the unconscious, what truly makes us tremble is not falling into the abyss, but standing on the summit. Why does this paradox exist? Why would someone who longs for success unconsciously sabotage the very opportunities that could bring it about? To answer this, we must examine the structure of safety and the price of power. In American culture, we are taught to despise failure. Yet psychologically, failure carries a surprisingly sweet hidden reward, absolute safety. When you fail, or when you accept the identity of being inadequate, you are granted a kind of exemption from responsibility by society and by yourself. A failed person is allowed to feel sad, to complain, and most importantly, to receive sympathy or consolation from others. No one places expectations on someone who is kneeling. No one demands that a weakened person carry the weight of the world. This state, though painful at the conscious level, gently soothes the ego that longs to escape the burden of maturity. It is like curling up under an old blanket on a freezing winter day. The blanket may be musty and cramped, but it is warm and familiar. Failure also allows us to preserve the illusion of potential. As long as you have not truly poured all your strength into doing something great, you can still comfort yourself with the mantra, "If I had really tried, I could have done it." Sir, failing because you didn't try hard enough is far more tolerable than having given everything you had and still not reaching the goal. And so, many people choose to live cautiously, choosing a half-hearted failure to protect their fragile sense of self-worth. By contrast, success, or more precisely, owning your power, is an extremely dangerous state for the unconscious. In Jung's understanding, power is the burden of consciousness. The moment you step into the light and claim your authority, you immediately lose the right to remain hidden. First, you must accept a kind of exile from the warmth of the herd. The crowd always seeks consensus and mediocrity. When you dare to become exceptional, you disrupt that order. You become the nail that sticks out, waiting to be hammered down, or the tallest flower in the garden, most vulnerable to the wind. This fear is an evolutionary inheritance, millions of years old. Separation from the tribe once meant death. And so, when your inner potential urges you to rise above, an ancient biological mechanism pulls you back, whispering, "Don't shine. It will be cold up there. No one will protect you anymore." Greatness is always accompanied by existential loneliness. Pioneers, reformers, or simply the first person in a family to break inherited limitations, all must accept walking alone for a long stretch of the road. Second, power demands radical responsibility. This is the most terrifying part of all. When you acknowledge that you have the capacity to shape your life, you lose the right to blame. You can no longer blame your parents, the economy, a bad boss, or fate itself. If you are holding the pen that writes the script of your life, then every typo, every tragic or comic turn is your own creation. This freedom is immense, and its price is the complete loss of the victim role. For many people, bearing responsibility for their own happiness feels overwhelmingly heavy. So heavy that they would rather hand that power over to someone else or surrender themselves to the current of life simply to avoid facing the pressure of self-governance. But the deepest layer of the fear of power does not lie in external pressure. It lies in a brutal inner truth we try desperately to conceal. If today you admit that you possess enough power to change, to rise toward the heights you have long admired, through the mechanism of projecting golden shadow, then you are forced to face a blade-sharp question. So why have I been living like this for all these years? To face one's power is to confront wasted life, to admit that one's mediocrity was not caused by a lack of ability, nor by circumstances, but by cowardice, that you had wings, yet chose to crawl along the ground simply because you were afraid of the height. This is the pain of regret, the most psychologically destructive emotion of all. It is far more tolerable to believe you are inadequate than to admit you were capable, but chose not to act. Precisely to avoid this heart-rending pain, our defense mechanisms work at full capacity. We hypnotize ourselves into believing we are not good enough. We procrastinate not because we are lazy, but to prevent ourselves from finishing and having to face real outcomes. We develop imposter syndrome, constantly fearing that someone will expose us as undeserving, even when we are fully deserving. All these psychological barriers are erected for one reason only: to keep us from touching our true power, because touching it would require us to judge our own past. Imagine yourself at 80 years old, sitting in an armchair, watching the film of your life. You see a safe life, no major mistakes, no scandals, but also no imprint. Then you see your shadow version step forward, the one who dared to do everything you were afraid of. That person is radiant, scarred, yet with eyes blazing alive. The most painful moment is not death, but the realization. That person should have been you. That is the cost of safety. However, this harsh judgment is not the aim of Carl Jung, nor is it the spirit of this piece. We expose fear not to punish ourselves, but to understand. Look at this fear of power through the eyes of compassion. Understand that the inner child within you is trembling. It fears abandonment if it becomes too powerful. It fears attack if it dares to stand taller than others. It fears carrying the weight of the world before it feels ready. This fear is a natural self-protective response, not a character flaw, But understanding is not the same as indulgence. We soothe the child, but we must awaken the adult. We cannot allow fear of loneliness or responsibility to imprison our soul forever inside a narrow cocoon. Human life is a brief experiment, and the greatest tragedy is not death, but never having truly lived. So how do we move beyond this fear? How do we transform from merely knowing our potential into living it, without collapsing under the pressure? For that, we need a strategy for the next step. Number 5, the solution, acting even when it isn't perfect. Before we begin, there is one crucial thing you must remember. We do not need more preparation. We do not need another flawless plan. What we need is an entirely new philosophy of action, an antidote to paralysis. Carl Jung, throughout a lifetime of working with thousands of patients, discovered this key. It does not lie in control, but in flow. The power of the draft, the sacred permission to be wrong. In modern culture, we are obsessed with final products. We see championship trophies, best-selling books, or billion-dollar companies, and we unconsciously believe the path to them is a straight line of uninterrupted excellence. But this is a dangerous optical illusion. Psychological reality shows that the maturation of the personality does not unfold linearly, but in a spiral of trial and error. To break paralysis, the first and most important step is to accept the sacred mess. Imagine your life as an artist's studio, not a polished gallery. In a gallery, everything must be perfect, not a speck of dust in sight. But in the studio, the floor is splattered with paint, unfinished canvases lie scattered everywhere, and wild ideas are sketched out in haste. Real life happens in the studio, not in the gallery. True freedom begins the moment you allow yourself to make mistakes. Accept this liberating truth. Your first attempt will be bad, messy, and full of flaws, and that is completely okay. In Jung's system of archetypes, before there can be the king or the hero, there must always be the fool. The fool is the one who dares to walk toward the abyss with an empty bundle and an innocent smile. He is not afraid of being laughed at because he has no image to protect. If you want to awaken the king or queen within you, your power, you must allow the fool to lead the way first. Allow yourself to write clumsy pages. Allow yourself to speak English with broken grammar. Allow yourself to begin that business project as an amateur. Why is the draft so crucial? From the perspective of mental energy, Carl Jung understood libido, psychic energy, as something akin to water. The nature of water is to flow. When water is blocked, it stagnates, breeds bacteria, and turns into a swamp of gloom, neurosis. In the same way, when the creative energy or impulse to act within you is damned by something called "it must be perfect," that energy turns back on you. Anxiety, restlessness, and even depression are, in essence, life energy screaming because it cannot find an outlet. The healing mantra for this blockage is simple. Life needs flow, not stillness. Americans often say, "Done is better than perfect." Through a Jungian lens, this can be understood more deeply as moving is better than being stuck. When you choose to act, even when you are not ready, you are choosing the side of life. You are telling the universe, "I am willing to join the dance, even if I might step on someone's toes." And the universe, which always favors movement, responds by sending you more energy. Dialoguing with the shadow, the alchemical technique of emotion. However, even when you understand the power of drafts and flow, there will be moments when fear rises so strongly that it paralyzes your body. At that point, reason no longer works. We need a method that works directly with the unconscious. Jung proposed a profound therapeutic method called active imagination, the art of dreaming while awake. We can apply it simply through journaling and observing our triggers. Instead of trying to think positively, to suppress fear, a futile effort, like trying to cover a volcano with your hands. Do the opposite. Invite the fear to sit down and speak with you. Prepare a notebook dedicated solely to the shadow. When anxiety, procrastination, or numbness appears, do not run away. Sit down and write this question to the fearful part itself. What power of mine are you guarding? This is a revolutionary question. It completely transforms your relationship with fear. Instead of seeing fear as an enemy to be destroyed, you see it as a guard standing watch over a treasure vault. Listen for the answer that arises from within. When you engage in dialogue, you separate yourself from the emotion. You become the observer, and the emotion becomes the observed. What follows is the phase of transformation, what Jung called the alchemy of the soul. Jung believed that all emotions are neutral energy. It is only the attitude of the ego that labels them as positive or negative. Anxiety is, in essence, excitement that is holding its breath. When you breathe deeply into anxiety and allow it to be present, it can transform into the anticipation that precedes a new journey. Anger toward yourself is, at its core, action energy that has been suppressed. Instead of using it to self-punish, redirect that fire into movement. Use that anger to write 1,000 words in one sitting, to run 5 kilometers, to clean up a long neglected mess. This is the true meaning of turning lead into gold. You do not discard fear. You use fear as fuel. A person who dares to act is not someone who feels no fear, but someone who knows how to burn fear to power their engine. The micro-strategy, the smallest possible step. Finally, to bring all of this into lived reality, we need a practical strategy aligned with the brain's biological wiring. Break it down to outsmart fear. As explored in the section on the fear of power, the unconscious is frightened by sudden, massive change. So begin with actions so small that neither your ego nor your shadow feels threatened. If you want to write a book, don't set the goal of writing chapter 1. Set the goal of writing 3 terrible sentences. If you want to change careers, don't submit your resignation immediately. Spend 10 minutes a day reading about the new field. These micro-actions work like small drops of water, persistent and patient, seeping into the cracks of the great rock of procrastination. They do not trigger fear's alarm system, yet they sustain flow. And once flow is established, by the law of inertia, it naturally expands and begins to sweep away larger obstacles. Acting even when you are not perfect is not merely an effective productivity strategy. It is a profound spiritual act, the act of accepting and loving your own raw humanity. And it is precisely within that acceptance that true power is released. Number 6, the destination, wholeness. If modern society, with its obsession with productivity and personal image, constantly pushes people toward perfection, Jung gently draws us back toward wholeness. These two concepts are often confused, yet in essence they stand in opposition to each other, like water and fire. Perfection is like a mountain carved from flawless white marble, smooth, without a single crack, yet devoid of life. It is cold, static, and brittle. One small mistake, one scratch, and the entire perfect statue collapses. Wholeness, by contrast, is like a primeval forest. There are radiant flowers reaching for the sun, representing light and consciousness, but there are also layers of decaying leaves, gnarled roots, and dark hollows representing shadow and the unconscious. The forest is not sterile or spotless, yet it is resilient. It regenerates itself and holds a fierce abundance of life. Jung called the journey of becoming that forest the process of individuation. Do not confuse this term with individualism, the self-centered isolation we often see. In Latin, individuum means indivisible. Individuation, therefore, is the process of gathering the fragmented pieces of the psyche into a unified whole, no longer torn apart by inner conflict. It is the sacred union in which consciousness and the unconscious join hands. This acceptance does not mean indulging evil or allowing destructiveness to run free. On the contrary, When consciousness illuminates the unconscious, it removes the shadow's dangerous fangs. A person who knows they are capable of cruelty will be more careful with their words than someone who believes themselves to be entirely pure. Wholeness brings a profound sense of peace, the peace that comes when an inner civil war has ended. You no longer expend energy suppressing, hiding, or denying any part of yourself. You are allowed to be a complete human being with all the shimmering imperfections of humanity. But the value of wholeness does not stop at personal healing. Jung offered a vision that was almost prophetic regarding its social impact, something the world today needs more than ever. We are living in an age saturated with division, hatred, and conflict. We see enemies everywhere, on social media, across political divides in other nations. As Jung once summarized the law of projection, when an inner situation is not made conscious, it happens outside as fate. The outer world, in essence, is a mirror reflecting our inner state. Wars, racism, waves of online hatred, all of these are massive projections of the collective shadow. Therefore, each individual's journey toward wholeness carries a profound moral responsibility. When one person heals their own shadow, they stop projecting hatred onto the world, and in doing so, contribute to healing humanity's collective shadow. Imagine if each of us took responsibility for our own inner garden, cleaning up our own debris instead of throwing it over the fence into our neighbor's yard. How different would the world be? World peace, from Jung's perspective, does not begin with treaties signed at conference tables. It begins with peace within the soul of each individual. When you arrive at wholeness, you no longer need the world to validate you, because you have already validated yourself, and you no longer fear the world's judgment, because you understand the darkness of humanity. You become free, and that quiet freedom is the greatest gift you can offer to this life. Our journey pauses here, but your real life is only just beginning. Together, we have loosened the shackles of the perfect victim and stepped toward the throne of the owner of power. Remember this, the shadow will never disappear, but instead of ruling you as a tyrant from the unconscious, it has now become an ally, an eternal source of fuel for your living flame. This world does not need more good people who know how to perform. The world is fractured, and it is longing for people who are authentic and powerful. Shrinking yourself into safe smallness helps no one. On the contrary, when you dare to step into the light, when you allow both your scars and your radiant talents to be seen, you unconsciously grant permission for those around you to do the same. Do not wait until you feel completely ready. That moment will never come. Act even while your hands are still trembling with fear. That is the only path to touching your destiny and becoming the person the universe intended you to be. If you have decided to stop running and to claim your power, affirm that commitment by commenting below, "I am whole." Like and share this video to spread courage to those who need it. And don't forget to subscribe so we can continue walking together on the path of healing and returning to wholeness. I'll see you on the other side of fear.